And welcome to another week of Wandering Toward Wonder with Pastor Will. My name is Will Green, and I am the associate pastor, one of the associate pastors, and the director of discipleship at Foundry United Methodist Church in Washington, D.C. I'm really excited that you're here with me today, no matter when or where you're joining me. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for carving out a few moments to reflect with me today on the ways we cultivate the kind of wonder in our lives that invites us to love God more deeply, to live life a little more freely, and that fuels our witness for that love and freedom and life in the world. Take a few moments, if you will, and drop a line in the comments to let me know where you're watching from today. And, if you're finding ways or a way that you've been experiencing wonder in the last week, I'd love to know what that is. Go ahead and share that using the hashtag Wandering Toward Wonder in the comments section, and leave that as a blessing and invitation to wonder for others who might be watching with us today. As always, I just want to share a couple of the ways that we're collectively cultivating space for wonder at Foundry. There are lots of those these days. Our weekly Connections e-newsletter comes out every Tuesday at 5 p.m. and outlines all kinds of ways that you can connect in Christian fellowship and community. You can find that MailChimp email posted on our Facebook page or receive it in your inbox. And if you're not receiving that and you'd like to, we're going to drop a link in the comment section that you can click on and sign up to receive that email so that you can see weekly all of the classes, the small groups, and the opportunities for mission and ministry that we have going for us at Foundry. There are lots of those. We also get together weekly on Zoom using a link we're going to drop in the comments on Wednesdays at 6:15 p.m. For a worship service we're calling Waypoint. It's a live interactive prayer service that's really designed to be a place in the middle of the week for you to kind of gather in, to carve out a little bit of space for rest, and to ground yourself in some grace for the ongoing journey in the week ahead. That space is held and led by Foundry lay leaders and extended clergy, and is always a blessing. So I do hope you'll join. So anyway, to the work that we have before us today. As I've been preparing for this morning, I've had Miss Verney on my mind a lot. Verney Shurtan was a member of one of my very first churches, Overcup United Methodist Church in Central Arkansas, and she was a lifelong resident of the same county, the same few square miles, in the same congregation. Miss Verney was a pillar of that little country church that I served, and has remained for me and remains for me a really enduring example of what it means to trust in and remember God's faithfulness. During the short 2.5 years we ministered together, Miss Verney endured any number of personal and family tragedies and trials. And here are some, just to name a few. She got pinned beneath a cow gate during a tornado on her farm. She got run over by her own truck when she forgot to put it in park, and had one or two or three strokes. We really aren't sure, because Verney was not a fan of the doctor or the hospital. But despite all of that, every time I would go to visit her, or I would sit with her on her porch as she recovered, Miss Verney always found a way to pivot from my questions about how she was holding up, or what was going on in her own life, to tell stories about how faithful God had been to her. And those stories varied. They might have been a visit from a good friend that left her feeling a little bit stronger. It might have been a relative who stopped by with some extra food that she needed for the week. It might be a recounting of an experience from her childhood or early adulthood, in which she came to know that she was stronger than the present trial she was facing. But Miss Verney was always talking about the gift of leaning on those everlasting arms that we sing about in that old church hymn, and that she dearly, dearly loved. In my limited pastoral experience at the moment, what I didn't see, I don't think, is the way that Verney was not only speaking about God's present faithfulness in that moment, but was really reminding herself of God's past faithfulness, so that in a present moment that was shaped by pain and anxiety, maybe some anger, and certainly some fear, she could trust in God's future faithfulness, even when in that moment she couldn't perceive it. And in her memory of God's faithfulness, she found a wellspring of strength and hope that helped her push through the moments when everything felt wearying and hopeless, that helped her find some strength, some space to rest, and the knowledge that she was going to be okay. Of course, what Verney was doing is nothing new. From the very beginning, faithful followers of God have, in some of life's most difficult moments, turned to the memory and story of God's faithfulness as a way of enduring difficulty, and trusting that beyond all of that they were experiencing, God was working to make a way back toward healing, wholeness, and hope. When we gather for love feasts, or communion, or baptism, the prayers we lift really are nothing less than a recounting of God's faithful and relentless pursuit of us from generation to generation. We say this in communion: "You formed us in your image and breathed into us the breath of life. When we turned away and our love failed, your love remained steadfast. You delivered us from captivity, made covenant to be our sovereign God, and spoke to us through your prophets." And hear these words from the communion liturgy: "When nothing existed but chaos, you swept across the dark waters and brought forth light and then life. In the days of Noah, you saved those on the ark through water. After the flood, you set in the clouds a rainbow. When you saw your people as slaves in Egypt, you led them to freedom through the sea. Their children you brought through the Jordan to the land which you had promised." In both of these instances, the liturgy is reminding us that God is faithful from generation to see God's people through whatever present trial or tribulation that they're facing. And in our sacramental life, when we gather around everyday elements of water and bread and juice and oil, whether it's a love feast we're celebrating in our homes, or blessedly in the future we're back together again, we are engaging the work of sacred memory, much like Miss Burney. Each of us in those moments bearing our own hopefulness and doubt, our deep joys and our profound sorrows, and remembering that people just like us have done the same for millennia and continue to find in those spaces a God who, despite any and everything, loved them, showed up on their behalf, helped them have what they need, and called them forward into a world which, while certainly uncertain, God went with them to serve. In this practice of memory, we ground ourselves in God's past faithfulness, like Miss Burney. We reorient ourselves toward our present realities, despite it all, claiming some sense of joy, hope, and strength, and we position our hearts in an attitude of anticipation for the ways that God will go ahead of us to make a way, no matter what those present realities we're currently facing may be. These practices, this remembering and trusting in God's faithfulness, are the embodiment of what we say when we say our God is one who will never leave or forsake us, and unites our hearts and our lives and our experiences and our present trouble to the great cloud of witnesses who, like us, have prayed those prayers and celebrated those moments and told those stories of faithfulness for 2,000 years. And here's why I think this is important for us today, why Miss Burney may have a word for us. You know, trusting in God's faithfulness isn't about burying our heads in the sand and ignoring reality. It's not about abdicating our responsibility to show up and speak out in the world. But it is about remembering that we don't have to do it all. And that what we are called to do, we don't have to do alone. It's about remembering, in moments when we're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted, that we're not the first to endure the scourge of a pandemic, or confront powers and principalities which maliciously sacrifice in action or policy the bodies of the most marginalized in our communities. We're not the first to engage in the disruption and dismantling of unjust systems, nationally, denominationally, or anything in between. We're not the first to feel like we're failing at parenthood or partnership or in our professions, faltering in our friendships, or feeling wearied simply by the responsibility of showing up. We're not the first. We're not the only. And that just as God has been faithful from generation to generation to hold all of those things in grace and continued to call us forward in love regardless, there is nothing in this present moment that you or I or we can do that will undermine, deter, or defeat God's faithfulness to us now. So today, as we continue wandering toward wonder in this wonky, weird world we find ourselves waking up to each day, I want to encourage you not to pretend that it's okay, not to feel like you always have to have it all together, not to even think you've always got to get it right. Instead, Know that you won't always be okay. You won't always have it together. And you and we won't always get it right. Instead, just remember that whether you do or you don't, God's faithfulness to fulfill God's promises endures. As the hymnist, and they always seem to get it right, says, "Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father, there is no shadow of turning with thee. Thou changest not thy compassions, they fail not. As thou hast been, thou forever wilt be. Great is thy faithfulness, morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me." Let us pray. God, we give thanks for the sacred reminders of your faithfulness, for the rising of the sun as certain as its setting, which bathes this morning in beauty and light, for the choirs of songbirds whose songs continue despite the seriousness of these days, for the simple gifts of laughter poured out like water when the internet fails, or pets photobomb Zoom calls, or things go decidedly different than we'd planned. In the waiting and watching of these days, God, with the weight of the world pressing in on us, grant us the grace we need to trust in your faithful provision and presence in our lives. Not so that we might ignore or abdicate that to which we've been called, or so that we might indulge our desire to desert the real work of this present moment, but so that we might find in that trust the holy liberation available to those who know the work is not theirs alone. The responsibility need not be borne by them alone. And that where you call us to go, and in that which you call us to do, you will provide all that we need. God, for all those in the sound of my voice this day who hunger, or hurt, or long for connection, for all those in the sound of my voice this day in whom anger, anxiety, and resentment are taking root, for all those in the sound of my voice this day who are weary, threadbare, and near collapse, I pray the power of your Spirit attend them in their need, hold them in their hurting, and grant them the knowledge of your love which holds them and us and promises to never let us go. In your name, make it so. Amen. Friends, I'm really grateful that you joined me today. Thank you so much for carving out this time together. I want to encourage you to continue finding all of the ways to connect that there are through our Community Foundry United Methodist Church. Of course, our pastors are doing lives every day here on Facebook. You can join Pastor Ginger tomorrow for her Ponderings from the Purple Parlor at noon. And certainly be sure to check back on Facebook regularly for all the great things that we've got going on. I want to especially lift up one last word about an upcoming WIN action that you'll find information posted on our Facebook page. That's going to be on Thursday of this week. We encourage you to go ahead and sign up and join us as we speak out on behalf of the marginalized in our community. Friends, as always, God loves you and I love you. Remember to be gentle with yourselves and keep wandering towards wonder. Bye for now.